We need to talk about one of the most spectacularly aging takes in WNBA media history. Last season, ESPN's Elle Duncan went on air and told millions of viewers that new fans were sucking the life out of the league, not helping it, not growing it, draining it. Fast forward to today, and the WNBA is staring down collapsing viewership numbers, serious labor tension, and a fan base that feels completely alienated. Even Rebecca Lobo is now calling out the very attitude Duncan represented. So here's the question nobody wants to ask out loud. Does Elle Duncan owe Caitlin Clark and her fans an apology? Because what we're watching right now might be the most embarrassing backfire in women's basketball media. Let me set the stage. This was peak Caitlin Clark era. The WNBA was experiencing something it had never seen before. Not just a good year, historic attention, games selling out across the country, TV ratings exploding, major networks finally putting women's basketball in prime segments instead of burying it at the bottom of sports shows. This was everything the league had been begging for over 2 decades. And right in the middle of that breakthrough moment, Duncan looked at the growth and called it a problem. New fans, she said, were sucking the life out of the WNBA. Let that sit for a second. Before Caitlin Clark showed up, the WNBA had been struggling financially for over 20 years. Limited coverage, empty seats, consistent losses. The league survived because the NBA kept writing checks. That was the baseline. Then Clark gets drafted, and suddenly the fever become must-watch television. Ratings jump. Arenas fill up everywhere they play. Networks start talking about WNBA games like they actually matter. Momentum builds fast. The entire business direction of the league starts shifting. And somehow, Elle Duncan looked at all that momentum and decided it was dangerous. New fans are the problem, she said. New fans are sucking the life out of the league. That might be one of the most backwards, self-sabotaging takes you can imagine when your sport is finally breaking through. If you believe the story behind the story matters, hit that like button right now. It tells us you see what's really happening here. What makes Duncan's comments even worse is that she wasn't alone in thinking this way. There was a clear wave of WNBA players, media figures, and longtime fans who seemed genuinely irritated that the league was suddenly becoming popular. Instead of celebrating the attention, they pushed back against it. New fans were criticized for not knowing decades of league history. Caitlin Clark was resented for being the reason people were finally tuning in. Success itself became a problem because it wasn't unfolding on their preferred terms. When someone pushed back during that ESPN segment and pointed out the obvious fact that viewership had never been higher because of Caitlin Clark, that major shows were now running extended segments on women's basketball. Duncan waved it away. She treated the attention like it was toxic, like it came with hidden strings, like growth was somehow dangerous. What she and others completely missed is how sports media actually works. Networks cover what people want to watch. First Take wasn't spending 40 minutes on the WNBA before Caitlin Clark because the audience simply wasn't there. That's not disrespect. That's not bias. That's business. No network is giving prime airtime to content that doesn't bring in viewers. Once Clark showed up and WNBA games started pulling real numbers, the coverage naturally followed. That's how sports coverage has always worked. Football dominates coverage because people watch it. The NBA gets more attention than overseas leagues because the audience is larger. The WNBA was finally entering that cycle. And instead of embracing it, voices like Duncan tried to shut it down. This situation was never hard to understand. What made it messy was the refusal to accept how star power actually works. Elle Duncan and others treated the nonstop coverage of Caitlin Clark like it was some kind of injustice, as if attention itself was being stolen instead of earned. They wanted exposure for the league, but pushed back against the very reason that exposure showed up. The truth is simple. Popularity doesn't spread evenly. It follows names, moments, and players that pull people in. Clark did that. The league benefited from it, but instead of leaning into the momentum, Some voices acted uncomfortable with where it came from. They wanted growth without a face attached to it, and that's not how sports have ever worked. There was also a lot of talk about how the WNBA already had strong storylines before Clark arrived. People mentioned competition, passion, and great basketball. All of that may have been true on the court, but the missing piece was always the audience. If those storylines were clicking on a national level, the numbers would have shown it. They didn't. Before Clark, there was no consistent mainstream buzz, no regular sellouts, no long-form debates on major shows. That's not an insult to the talent. It's just the reality of where the league stood. Many of you have been saying this for weeks. The disconnect wasn't about basketball quality. It was about reach. The league had skilled players and competitive games for years. But without someone who could pull a mainstream audience in, that quality stayed locked inside a small circle. Caitlin Clark became the bridge. She brought casual sports fans, college basketball followers, and people who had never watched women's basketball into the WNBA ecosystem. That's what star power does. It opens doors. But instead of protecting that moment, instead of welcoming those new fans and building on the momentum, the gatekeeping started immediately. New fans were told they didn't understand the league. They were accused of only caring about one player. Their motives were questioned. Their interest was treated like a threat instead of an opportunity. And Elle Duncan's comments on ESPN became the clearest representation of that attitude. Reading between the lines, what Duncan was really saying was that growth needed to happen on her terms. The league could expand, but only if new fans arrived with the right knowledge, the right appreciation for history, the right reasons for watching. That mindset doesn't work in professional sports. Fans show up for their own reasons. Your job as a league, as media, as players, is to meet them where they are and give them reasons to stay, not to interrogate why they came in the first place. Now, here's where the entire thing falls apart. Fast forward to today. And the consequences of that gatekeeping mentality are impossible to ignore. Drop a comment right now if you've been watching this unfold. Let us know what you think went wrong, because the evidence is stacking up fast and it's not pretty. Viewership is sliding. The energy that carried last season has completely evaporated. The league is facing serious labor tension, with public opinion shifting in ways nobody predicted. And the most telling part, Unrivaled, the new off-season league that was supposed to keep momentum alive, is struggling badly with ratings. National broadcasts on major networks have pulled shockingly low numbers. For a product with that level of exposure and promotion, those results raise massive questions. The reason isn't complicated. Caitlin Clark isn't involved. And a huge portion of the audience that entered women's basketball because of her simply has no reason to tune in. That doesn't mean other players lack skill or value. It means they don't currently move the needle on their own. That distinction matters. Star power has always driven sports. It decides what people watch, what gets discussed, and where money flows. Clark has that pull right now. Most players don't. Saying that out loud isn't disrespectful. It's acknowledging how professional sports actually function. Some players framed Unrivaled as a lesson in running a business, but the results suggest the opposite. If broadcast partners are questioning the value of the deal because of weak engagement, that's not a success story. That's a warning sign, and it connects directly back to what Elle Duncan got wrong. She assumed the WNBA could sustain momentum without the player who created it. She assumed fans would stick around after being told they were watching for the wrong reasons. That assumption is now being tested in real time, and it's failing. Rebecca Lobo has stepped in with a completely different message. And the contrast is striking. Lobo has been urging players and media voices to communicate better, to stop pushing fans away, to recognize that growth requires meeting people where they are instead of demanding they arrive on your terms. She's talked about playing early in her career in tiny venues with limited resources and how the league today is in a completely different place. Salaries are higher. Facilities are better. Support systems exist that didn't before. When fans learned about these details during recent labor discussions, it changed how many of them viewed the situation. Housing assistance, childcare options, upgraded travel, long-term investment, all of that is now part of the structure. The narrative of exploitation stopped lining up with the facts. Compared to the league's actual revenue, players are being supported at a level past generations never experienced. That disconnect weakened the messaging. And once trust erodes, fans don't rally, they step back. Connecting the dots reveals something deeper here. The frustration toward new fans last season, the resentment toward Caitlin Clark for becoming the main draw, the unwillingness to admit why the league finally started breaking through, all of that created an environment where fans felt unwelcome. Their interest was questioned. Their motives were dissected. Over time, that wears people down. Fans don't stay where they feel unwanted. That's how you end up in a place where ownership suddenly has more public backing than the players. Not because fans love management, but because they no longer feel aligned with the voices speaking for the league. Once that bond breaks, rebuilding it becomes the hardest challenge of all. At some point, fans hit a breaking point. When people feel talked down to or treated like a problem, they stop showing up. That's exactly what has happened here, and the numbers reflect it. Elle Duncan's comments didn't come out of nowhere. They reflected a mindset that treated growth like a problem instead of an opportunity. Now that mindset is catching up with everyone involved. What makes this especially frustrating is how unnecessary it all was. The league had momentum. New fans were showing up in huge numbers. Media attention was finally consistent. If players and media figures had leaned into that moment, welcomed the attention, and embraced Clark's impact as a positive, the WNBA would be in a much stronger position today. Instead, the league is staring at labor turmoil with public support slipping away. Fans who were once excited feel disconnected. The energy that carried last season has faded because it was never protected. There's a bitter irony in how things played out. New fans were labeled as a threat, and now the absence of those fans is being felt everywhere. Lobo's efforts to course correct feel more like damage control than a reset. Momentum is fragile. Once it's pushed away, getting it back is never guaranteed. This whole situation should be a case study in how fast momentum can disappear. The WNBA had something real in its hands, a breakout star, new fans flooding in, media attention that could have changed the league's future for a generation, and instead of protecting that moment, it was treated with suspicion, resentment, and ego. Nobody forced this outcome. Fans didn't turn on the league out of nowhere. They were pushed away piece by piece, told they were watching for the wrong reasons, told their support didn't count, told they were part of the problem instead of the solution. Eventually, they listened. Now the league is facing declining interest, shaky labor talks, and a credibility problem that didn't exist a year ago. The same voices that dismissed new fans are now watching the numbers fall and wondering what went wrong. The answer has been right in front of them the entire time. Growth doesn't happen on your terms. It happens on the audience's terms. And when a sport finally finds a bridge to the mainstream, burning that bridge is the worst possible move. Rebecca Lobo is trying to rebuild what was damaged. She's calling for smarter communication and a reset in tone. But rebuilding trust is much harder than keeping it. Once fans feel unwanted, they don't rush back. They move on. So does Elle Duncan owe Caitlin Clark and her fans an apology. Many of you would say, absolutely. The comments aged terribly. The momentum they helped undermine is gone, and the league is now paying the price for that attitude in ways that are measurable and undeniable. If you want to stay ahead of every twist, every leak, every story they're not telling you, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. We've got the next chapter of this story coming, and you're not going to want to miss it. Drop a comment, share this video. Let's keep this conversation going. This is where the real story lives.